The precinct went quiet. I needed to step back and let the grim reality take over. Whispers echoed through the dispatch, a female corpse discovered. Investigators were hunting down a shadow tied to Chelsea Bruck, vanishing into the dark. The microscopic evidence never lies. His genetic markers were violently stamped across her shredded garments. Daniel Clay left a biological signature permanently stained into her disguise. A landowner moving earth stumbled upon a literal nightmare bone fragments buried deep within Ash Township. He caught a permanent cage for murder. The nightmare kicked off on a chilling October 31st in Michigan. A raging inferno, thumping bass, and hundreds of strangers masking their true faces. Lost in that chaotic sea stood a 22-year-old girl flashing a brilliantly innocent grin. Dressed as a comic book villain with decades left to live. Come daylight, she had evaporated entirely. Prepare yourself for Michigan's absolute darkest, most psychologically twisted puzzle. This terror bypassed the concrete jungle. It stalked a sleepy country town where deadbolts gathered dust and everybody knew your secrets. Meet Chelsea Bruck. On October 25th, 2014, she stepped into a Frenchtown township bash radiating pure energy. The clock struck 1:30 in the morning when a random lens framed her face. Grinning with a drink, she remained entirely oblivious that this single snapshot documented her final moments breathing. Around 3 in the morning, desperation kicked in as she scrambled for an exit. Device dead, isolated in pitch black among masked figures, praying for an escape route. She evaporated instead. 6 agonizing months of shattered hopes and sinister dead ends immediately ensued. A shredded, crimson-soaked outfit surfaced miles away. Later, human bones emerged by forgotten train tracks, discarded like absolute garbage. The predator roamed utterly unchecked, playing normal, while an entire town fractured under suffocating grief. We are about to dissect every sinister, twisted piece of Chelsea Bruck's demise, starting from her chilling vanishing act to the shocking scientific twist, until the gavel permanently slammed on her predator's freedom. We are rewinding straight to ground zero, dissecting every clue, because her brutal narrative demands absolute exposure. The raw horror of that evening will permanently sear into your brain. Let us dig in. Prior to analyzing the tragedy, you must understand the innocent target. The media often strips away humanity, reducing victims to mere statistics or flashy broadcasts. She heavily defied those labels. She possessed a vibrant soul, forging a massive path forward. Raised deep within Monroe County, Michigan, she called a microscopic town named Maybe her sanctuary. A literal blip on the map. Barely 600 residents packed under 2 square miles. A remote spot where buying groceries requires a serious trek. Endless fields dominate, neighbors harbor no secrets, and cafes serve the exact same suspects daily. Her bloodline tirelessly managed a 160-acre agricultural compound. That specific detail screams grit. Her folks were relentless laborers who never quit. Forged entirely in that hardworking fire, she remained the baby out of 5 siblings. Locals will absolutely swear those female siblings shared a fiercely unbreakable link. Dubbed the Bruck Squad, a completely unified, untouchable front of 5. The youngest silently anchored them all. Friends echoed the exact same chillingly sweet praise constantly. Massive grin, deeply empathetic soul. She stayed highly guarded upon first encounters, highly cautious until trust was completely earned. Then, her magnetic charm suddenly clicked into place. Hilarious without ever forcing a single punchline. Spontaneous humor that effortlessly cracked up entire crowds. Furthermore, her unique mindset was universally inspiring. Whenever life grew utterly brutal, she gripped a fierce, stubborn positivity. She absolutely refused to break under pressure. Beyond harsh daily duties, her private universe revolved around heavy digital gaming. A girl vanishes without a trace. But before the nightmare, she just loved books, cinematic scores, and baking. The culinary world wasn't merely some weekend pastime. Mastering flavors was the absolute driving force of her existence. It was an obsession that practically screamed her ultimate destiny. Chelsea absorbed that calling, fully ready to carve out her legacy. She actively plotted her enrollment at Monroe County Community College's gastronomy program, firmly planting her roots in Michigan soil. Far from an idle dreamer, she aggressively hunted down her goals. Her trajectory was entirely set in stone. 22 years old and fiercely prepared, she laid out her blueprint, grinding away as an Olga's kitchen hostess for 4 solid years. 4 brutal years punching that same exact clock, clocking in relentlessly to stockpile cash for her impending breakthrough. Her colleagues memorized her daily rhythms, her smile, and her distinct chuckle. Yet beneath that mundane surface, a coworker harbored a sinister, lethal link to the young woman's impending doom. That terrifying thread stayed buried for nearly 2 agonizing years post-vanishing. We'll unravel that horror later. Here is the core truth. 22-year-old Chelsea Bruck hailed from rural Michigan, armed with fiercely loyal relatives, a tight-knit squad, relentless work ethic, and fierce independence. She wasn't some cheap, sensationalized media headline. She wasn't some cold true crime metric. She was flesh and blood, completely robbed of her safe return home. On October 25, 2014, she slipped into her most elaborate Halloween disguise. Stepping off her porch toward what seemed like a harmless bash with pals, she remained completely blind to the waiting monster. That late October 25, 2014, Saturday plunged Frenchtown Township, Michigan, 15 minutes from her sleepy hometown of Maybe, into darkness. The typically desolate rural asphalt drag erupted into pure, unadulterated chaos that fateful evening. Local heavy metal frontman Mike Williams of Pickaxe Preacher threw his notorious annual Halloween blowout deep on his sprawling acreage. Labeling this a mere party is a gross understatement. This wasn't some pathetic backyard kickback with cheap beer and a playlist. It was an all-out, sprawling underground rager. The compound boasted live rock sets, literal fire spitters, towering infernos, massive food spreads, elaborate gore decor, and high-stakes costume wars. The host practically militarized the perimeter, employing private bouncers and valet crews to herd the endless swarming throngs until dawn. Once the madness peaked, well over 600 shadowy figures had flooded through the property's iron gates. Let that sink in. 600 revelers. That staggering mob dwarfed the entire census of Maybe, the isolated village she called home. Deafening, wildly disorganized, and overflowing with unknown faces, it was the exact thrilling escape she desperately craved. Fixated on claiming the disguise crown, she painstakingly crafted her sinister alter ego with intense, obsessive precision. Transforming into Poison Ivy, she donned dark leggings, a foliage-wrapped corset, and a striking, flowing violet hairpiece. Her standout ensemble commanded the room's gaze. What felt like an aesthetic flex swiftly mutated into the most haunting, pivotal clue of the upcoming manhunt. Flanked by her closest confidant, Rebecca, she breached the party's perimeter right around 11 o'clock that evening. Just 2 naive Midwestern girls stepping into the fray, heavily disguised and hyped to ride the adrenaline wave alongside massive hordes. Initially, the vibe felt totally standard, completely harmless. 0 red flags waved. Just another standard Halloween blowout. Deep into the witching hour, roughly 1:30, an anonymous lens swung her way, immortalizing her in a blinding flash. Flashing an authentic, radiant grin while gripping a fake venom flask packed with budget vino, she looked vibrantly, tragically alive. That exact snapshot soon dominated every local Michigan television broadcast. Plastered across countless missing person posters statewide, it morphed into the haunting visual anchor for the desperate search effort. Yet right then, it was nothing more than a fleeting digital memory captured amidst the swarming madness. The narrative surrounding her exact blood alcohol levels that evening fractures wildly depending on the interrogated source. Certain bystanders claimed she pounded drinks, riding the reckless vibe hard. Conversely, others swore she remained razor-sharp, completely shrugging off the surrounding intoxication. The terrifying reality about eyewitness testimony forged in the dark? When exposed to deafening music, massive crowds, and pure sensory overload, human recollection fractures into wildly unreliable fragments. Perspective shattered. Strangers fixated on entirely contradictory details. Once detectives actually began turning the screws during interrogations, those hazy mental snapshots had already warped dangerously out of focus. Eyewitnesses alleged that amidst the frenzy, she slammed face first into a timber support beam, slicing open her brow. A superficial wound, yet it thoroughly spiked her anxiety. Moments later, she desperately began pleading with shadows for an escape route back to safety. A single, forgotten phone. That was the tiny thread that unraveled a massive, dark nightmare. Her outfit lacked pockets or a purse, forcing Chelsea to leave her cell behind in Rebecca's vehicle right upon arrival. Once she finally wanted to bail, she was completely off the grid. No calls to relatives, no texting her ride. She had to rely purely on whoever was standing nearby. Realizing her friend was stranded without a device, Rebecca headed back to the parking area to grab it. She left her with one strict command: "Do not move an inch, I will be right back." Rebecca fetched the device and immediately returned to that precise location. But Chelsea vanished. No lingering a few yards away, no chatting with random strangers. Poof. Rebecca scoured the area, alongside the designated driver who was supposed to take Chelsea back later. Amid 600 bodies heavily disguised in masks and makeup swirling in chaotic waves of arrivals and departures, hunting for one specific face proved entirely futile. She was completely swallowed by the masses. Given the massive scale and late hour, they figured she bumped into another acquaintance and hitched an alternate lift. A totally rational thought process. The exact kind of innocent guesswork that turns absolutely haunting by dawn. The bash finally fizzled out. Embers faded to ash as the final stragglers piled into their vehicles. The heavy bass thump faded into silence. Total darkness hit. Yet, back in Michigan, Chelsea's bed remained untouched, and her cell stayed gripped in Rebecca's hand. Relatives were met with absolute radio silence. When dawn broke on October 26, 2014, a sickening, unshakable dread washed over her inner circle. A terrible realization clicked into place. Law enforcement stepped in. Paperwork was officially lodged. Instantly, Monroe County braced for an unprecedented, massive-scale manhunt. Investigators arrived at Mike Williams' estate that late October morning in 2014, instantly realizing one grim truth. You do not just stroll off this particular acreage at the witching hour. Tucked into a desolate pocket of Frenchtown Township, the land was boxed in by endless, twisting blacktop. Zero illumination, no adjacent subdivisions to navigate, and absolutely no transit. Cabs and ride-shares were non-existent out here. This was isolated Michigan backwoods where civilization felt galaxies away. Her residence sat roughly 8 miles out. 8 pitch-black, treacherous miles to traverse without a device or any lifeline. That brutal terrain spoke volumes to detectives immediately. Escaping on foot was practically out of the question. A darker logic took hold. She had to have climbed into a car. Somebody drove her out, but exactly who was behind the wheel? Meanwhile, the aftermath at the party grounds looked predictably grim. Absolute carnage. The giant fire pit was still smoking in the crisp air. Booze containers littered the dirt. A chaotic aftermath requiring a solid week of heavy cleanup. The host, Mike Williams, bluntly confessed he never knew she attended. The gathering had just ballooned that wildly out of control. You could party until dawn, chat up 50 different strangers, and never catch a single glimpse of her. Visibly rattled by the disappearance, he offered complete compliance to the authorities right out of the gate. Yet transparency is entirely useless when the physical clues are practically non-existent. Law enforcement quickly understood that piecing together a timeline would become a complete investigative nightmare. Upwards of 600 attendees swarmed the lot. With heavy prosthetics and masks disguising faces, spotting anyone was a lost cause. Compounding the issue, a massive chunk of the crowd was wasted or high for hours, leaving every incoming tip incredibly shattered, deeply unreliable, and clashing so fiercely that extracting the truth felt impossible. Sheriff Dale Malone of Monroe County openly admitted that several partiers, interviewed early on, were so blackout drunk that their testimonies were basically garbage. Several drew a total, terrifying blank. A few genuinely tried pitching in, but their brains were scrambled by the sheer madness of the evening. Regardless, an absolute behemoth of a search kicked into gear. Hundreds of locals poured in while tracking dogs hit the ground. Choppers sliced through the airspace overhead, backed by a fleet of hovering drones. Multiple local jurisdictions banded together, meticulously scouring the estate and ripping through every square inch of adjacent wilderness. What happens when a local girl is swallowed by the night? Monroe County mobilized instantly, completely terrified by the sinister reality suddenly lurking in their own backyards. Yet, combing through those shadows yielded absolute zero. No clues, no footprints. Chelsea Bruck was just gone, effectively erased from existence. Weeks dragged on. forcing exhausted detectives to dig relentlessly into murky partygoer testimonies, searching for the one chilling thread that actually mattered. One tipster alleged that right around 3 in the morning, a girl fitting Chelsea's exact profile slipped off the rural property alongside an unidentified male. This shadowy figure? He supposedly sported a black hooded sweatshirt, thick, heavy-rimmed spectacles, and hair brushed sharply across his forehead. Look, it is just a super common aesthetic these days, you know what I mean? Especially with that whole indie vibe. The specs, the haircut, it makes pinning down an identity incredibly difficult. I swore to the cops straight up, I have absolutely zero clue who that guy actually was. That frustratingly broad profile could have easily matched half the guys drinking at that bash, but detectives finally had a pulse. It was a terrifying breadcrumb. Law enforcement sat down with the informant, carefully piecing together a facial rendering of the phantom who supposedly walked her into the dark. Once that sketch hit the evening news, the tip lines exploded. When paranoia grips a community this tightly, you are bound to get twisted individuals feeding the frenzy with absolute lies. Enter a local named Heron Bird, who sat confidently before interrogators and spun a masterfully intricate web of deceit. He swore he played the hero, breaking up a violent dispute between Chelsea and 2 aggressive strangers, only to witness them dragging her into their getaway car later. It was a deeply chilling narrative. Filled with hyper-specific details, it gave the desperate task force exactly what they craved. The only catch? It was pure, unadulterated fiction. An absolute hoax from start to finish. Detectives swiftly slapped handcuffs on Bird, nailing him with severe felony charges for intentionally sabotaging a police probe. Shortly after, a woman named Carrie dialed authorities, frantically claiming her own lover admitted to orchestrating the young woman's sinister kidnapping. Task force members burned precious hours chasing down this horrific angle, only to crash into another agonizing brick wall. The sickening reality? She concocted the whole murder confession strictly as a malicious ploy to destroy her ex-boyfriend's life. She quickly joined Bird in a jail cell. 2 devastatingly fake trails, 2 criminals booked, absolutely zero truth, and a shattered family staring blankly at a silent receiver. As autumn bled into winter, the obsession over her vanishing mutated into an unprecedented civilian crusade. A dedicated social media coalition named Help Find Chelsea Bruck exploded, pulling in over 12,000 digital sleuths almost overnight. Well over 1 million missing posters featuring her haunting gaze papered telephone poles from the Michigan border to neighboring states. The bounty on the kidnapper's head skyrocketed. Search parties expanded their grim perimeter far beyond the local jurisdiction. Bizarre theories flooded in nationwide. Her 23rd birthday passed a grim, silent milestone wrapped in unbearable dread. Then came her older sibling's wedding. An event destined to be pure, unadulterated joy was thoroughly poisoned by grief. She should have been right there at the altar, stunning in a bridesmaid gown, cracking jokes and lighting up the room the way she always did. Instead, a suffocating void haunted the sanctuary where she belonged. That chilling emptiness spoke louder than any tragic eulogy ever could. Every single guest felt the heavy, unspoken dread, and then, out of nowhere, a tangible piece of the nightmare surfaced. Just a couple of miles from the farm, half buried in a desolate stretch of dirt, searchers uncovered a lone scarlet heel. It was definitively hers, a seemingly insignificant object, yet it was physical proof a horrifying artifact grounded in reality. This grim relic proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that pure evil had intercepted her right there in the county, and it violently yanked the detectives' crosshairs back to the desolate backroads hugging the farm, locking their radar firmly onto that specific acreage. They bagged the footwear, logging it into an ever-expanding murder book that offered up way more terrifying mysteries than actual solutions. But the hunt wasn't dead in the water. The gears of justice were just grinding forward at an agonizingly methodical pace. What was waiting in the shadows was about to rip the entire narrative wide open. 6 agonizing months. That is exactly how long she was a ghost before the task force stumbled onto the sinister breakthrough they had been praying for. Half a year of hunting, half a year chasing phantoms, and 180 days of her parents staring into a vacant room, practically suffocating on the silence. Then, during the spring of 2015, a pair of back-to-back blood-chilling finds flipped the entire investigation upside down. The first domino fell on April 6th, 2015. Deep inside an abandoned industrial tract roughly 15 miles from the bash, searchers stumbled upon the tattered remains of her poison ivy outfit. The iconic, foliage-laced corset she rocked the night she vanished was just rotting in the dirt, brutally decayed from a harsh winter out in the open. But the mangled state of that fabric whispered a highly disturbing secret all on its own. This garment hadn't been slipped off consensually. These violent, jagged rips weren't caused by wind or rain or passing time. The Monroe County Sheriff's Department immediately convened an emergency press conference, ready to drop a bombshell update regarding the dark fate of Chelsea Bruck. A ripped costume, a hidden grave. Was it random? Acting on a massive tip, authorities spent 2 intense days scouring the Velland and Peters site in Flat Rock. State troopers and local deputies finally unearthed crucial clothing, alongside vital forensic evidence. The Halloween outfit was completely shredded. Its shoulder straps were violently wrenched straight off the main fabric. The bottom half was brutally ripped apart. Stretched seams painted a horrifying picture of sudden, overwhelming brute force applied with terrifying, unrelenting physical power. These distinct rips definitely did not come from some innocent, accidental snag. They were vicious tears caused by an aggressive attacker lacking any patience, someone holding absolutely zero intent to be gentle. But the outfit concealed a far darker secret, a discovery that instantly escalated a simple missing persons case into a full-blown criminal nightmare. Crimson stains saturated the material. It was Chelsea's blood. Hidden beside her biological trace, lab technicians successfully isolated a chilling clue, the DNA of an unidentified male. Currently, the intense search is unfolding roughly a quarter-mile deep into the treacherous woods right behind me. It remains a highly restricted, active crime zone. State troopers are swarming the perimeter alongside Monroe County deputies. Let me step aside so you can look. The only official statement so far confirms our worst fears. Authorities discovered a woman's body buried deep within this dark forest. A mobile forensics unit just rolled up to the location. The Monroe County Sheriff himself is also walking the heavily guarded perimeter as we speak. Uncovered during construction. Miraculously, despite enduring brutal Michigan storms, freezing winds, and sub-zero temperatures for months, those crucial biological traces actually survived. The genetic sample was heavily degraded, yet surprisingly readable. It was fully viable, transforming into the smoking gun of the entire investigation. Detectives also zeroed in heavily on the exact recovery location of that outfit. This desolate industrial yard sat suspiciously close to a property legally owned by Heron Bird's grandmother, the exact same Heron Bird previously locked up for spinning a web of lies regarding Chelsea's whereabouts that night. Law enforcement could not ignore that glaring geographical overlap. The connection felt way too precise, too incredibly convenient to just sweep aside. Detectives hauled Bird straight back into the box. Investigators shredded his timeline, verified every alibi, and hammered him on those glaring inconsistencies. He willingly strapped in for a polygraph, showing zero deception, and voluntarily handed over his DNA to compare against the sinister profile found on the outfit. The lab results dropped. Absolute zero match. That chilling geographical link ultimately proved to be exactly what it claimed to be on the surface, a bizarre coincidence. A maddening, time-sucking dead end that violently threw detectives straight back to square one regarding genetic evidence. Yet that unidentified killer's genetic footprint remained locked inside a criminal database, silently ticking. Then hit April 24th, 2015, just 18 days post-discovery. An Ash Township local was excavating dirt right beside some abandoned train tracks when he suddenly spotted something that completely froze the blood in his veins. Half buried under a sloppy pile of dead branches and forest trash, barely 10 miles from that fateful Halloween bash, lay decaying human remains. The corpse was severely decomposed, entirely ravaged by harsh elements. It rotted there for months, totally exposed to a brutal Midwestern winter. There was zero dignity or caution in how the killer dumped the victim, attempting no real burial, no gravestone, just a pathetic, shallow, rushed cover-up job throwing together whatever dead wood lay around. The predator merely wanted to delay the inevitable discovery, not engineer a master-level vanishing act. Forensics pulled the victim's dental history for a definitive match, and the official report confirmed everyone's absolute worst nightmare. It was Chelsea Bruck. Faded ribbons tied around city streetlights stood as the town's last desperate prayer she remained alive. Now, the crushing confirmation of her death is heavily devastating the community. We always held on to a sliver of faith she'd walk through that door again. Now that flame is dead. We finally have our dark answers, but the painful reality suffocates. Down at Olga's kitchen inside the Monroe Shopping Center, her former workplace, purple memorial ribbons pushed every single customer to remember her name. Meanwhile, across the massive online community group that hooked thousands, tracking the search, her brother Nathan posted a heartbreakingly brief message yesterday, showing immense gratitude for everyone's relentless help. He boldly declared that while the agonizing hunt for Chelsea had finally ended, the aggressive war for true justice was just sparking to life. Brutal crimes occur worldwide, sure, but in our tight-knit rural town, everyone knows your face, everyone attends the same Sunday service, and everyone hears the whispers. Losing her feels exactly like losing a piece of our very own family. The tragic revelation washed over Michigan like a dark tide. Every major media network aggressively broadcasted the horror. That online page of 12,000 followers fell deathly quiet, then erupted into pure, collective agony. After 6 agonizing months clinging to a ghost of a chance, her family was forced to stare down a living nightmare no parent should ever endure. The youngest sister, the baby of the family, rotting out there in the timber, completely abandoned. When Wayne County's medical examiner finished dissecting the remains, the grim truth finally surfaced, validating what investigators secretly feared all along. Chelsea Bruck didn't just trip and fall. This wasn't some tragic misstep into the cold. She didn't freeze to death by accident. Someone slaughtered her. It was calculated, savage, and fueled by absolute rage. The coroner's official ruling cited catastrophic blunt force trauma to her skull. Yet the carnage extended way past one isolated strike. Her nasal cavity was crushed, her jawbone shattered entirely. Orbital fractures indicated a vicious, direct blow to the eye. The attacker even knocked out 2 of her teeth. Pathologists made it explicitly clear. This level of mutilation doesn't happen from a simple stumble or a random bar punch. The strikes were relentless. The destruction was systematic and deeply personal. Monroe County's agonizing 6-month missing persons puzzle officially became a full-blown murder hunt. The stakes just hit the ceiling. They finally had a body. They had cold, hard forensics. More importantly, they had an unidentified predator's biological signature sitting in a lab. And somewhere across Michigan, that monster was roaming completely free. His clock was ticking, though. For over 12 months following the grim discovery in the woods, detectives kept pushing through dead ends. That phantom male DNA trace clinging to her Halloween outfit remained their ultimate trump card. Except, a genetic code means absolutely squat without a face to pin it on. Law enforcement essentially held the master key to the entire mystery, but couldn't unlock the door. Not quite yet. The sheer volume of data they processed was mind-numbing. Over 1,000 civilian tips poured in. Detectives grilled more than 800 individuals. Judges signed off on 34 distinct search warrants. 14 subpoenas hit the courts. 50 different police departments stepped in at various stages to hunt down leads. Every single digit in those stats meant grueling shifts, endless paperwork, and a task force desperate to keep the trail hot. Desperate pleas to the community kept broadcasting. Detectives practically begged citizens to rewind their memories to that specific October night, urging them to scour their cell phones. They wanted every old text, every blurry picture, anything slightly off that someone forgot to mention. They cast a massive net, because when your entire strategy hangs on a ghost genetic profile, you can't afford to close any doors. Then, during the sweltering summer of 2016, the dam broke, and the cracks started in the most bizarre place imaginable. It wasn't a hero witness breaking their silence. Nobody called in a golden tip. There was no cinematic sting operation or tearful confession room breakdown. It boiled down to a petty, run-of-the-mill shoplifting bust. A completely irrelevant bottom-tier misdemeanor that seemingly had zero connection to the murdered girl, or so everyone thought. Anchors urged viewers to study the broadcasted mugshot, stating authorities desperately needed to interrogate him regarding the missing woman. A nightmare that originated way back in October of 2014. Viewers might remember 27-year-old Daniel Clay of Newport, Michigan, getting cuffed on July 22, 2016, for minor larceny. He snagged a backpack. At first glance, just another petty crook destined to be booked, fined, and tossed back on the street. Except Daniel Clay's rap sheet was a massive red flag. The guy had a lengthy jacket featuring narcotics possession, grand larceny, and felony breaking and entering. Add violent assault and battling uniformed cops to that list. This wasn't a rookie mistake, it was a lifelong career of chaos. Thanks to Michigan's legal statutes, his violent background, and the specifics of this new charge mandated an automatic genetic swab during intake. A mundane, 60-second procedural rule. That tiny cotton stick blew the case wide open. The moment Daniel Clay's spit hit the state database, red lights flashed. It was a flawless match to the ghost profile, clinging to Chelsea's clothing for nearly 2 years. The science was absolute, unquestionable. Zero gray area, no statistical hiccups, no room for a slick defense lawyer's alternative theory. The exact biological trace left on a butchered girl's costume, found dumped in an industrial wasteland 15 miles from a costume bash, perfectly mirrored a petty thief caught swiping a bag. By July 25, 2016, prosecutors slapped Daniel Clay with second-degree murder for Chelsea's gruesome demise. In the blink of an eye, a 2-year ghost hunt had a prime suspect. But cops needed leverage, because genetics only prove contact, not the kill. A single clue never paints the whole gruesome picture. To uncover the darkest truth, investigators had to stare straight into the eyes of Daniel Clay. Dragged into the precinct, his reaction was chillingly automatic. The moment her name was mentioned, he shut down hard. Sure, he knew the face plastered all over the evening broadcasts. He claimed he watched the tragedy unfold just like every other terrified citizen in Michigan. Yet he swore up and down they had zero physical contact, no crossing paths, zero conversation. Then, the interrogators dropped the bombshell. The mask slipped. He frantically backpedaled, swearing the science was dead wrong. Suddenly, his story morphed. Yes, he attended that exact October 31st bash, completely obliterated on booze and narcotics, leaving his memories shattered and wildly unreliable. He vaguely recalled hooking up in his vehicle with some random girl in the shadows, but he vehemently denied it was the missing victim. He doubled down on the lie. There was absolutely zero chance his trace evidence got onto her outfit. Impossible, he pleaded. Quote, I swear I did not sleep with her, never touched her, never. Why the hell would your biological material be all over her? No clue. Tangled in her hair or stained on her fabric? Investigators let him dig his own grave with lies. Once he backed himself into a corner, they launched a psychological ambush. It was time to turn the screws. Look, buddy, we know for a fact you hooked up with a brunette in your back seat. Sure, fine. You claim you drove off solo. Maybe that happened. Fine. But let us be real. We are 99.9% certain the girl you were with was our victim. Man, I was so wasted I have zero clue who I slept with. I know absolutely nothing about this. Your skin cells are literally embedded where her shirt and underwear were ripped apart. That is exactly where we found your trace. We are way beyond denials now. Look, we already know you ripped those garments to shreds. You physically shredded it. But hold on, let me finish. Someone was there, and here is the kicker. Look, evidence does not lie. Pay close attention to me. We are completely done playing these games. Done. We have the definitive lab results. Then, the cops fed him a brilliant, carefully crafted lie. It was a brutal but perfectly legal psychological trap designed to absolutely shatter his stubborn defenses. They spun a web, claiming the girl suffered from a bizarre bone-weakening disease where the slightest touch could be catastrophically fatal. They subtly gave him an out, hinting the horrific tragedy was just an unforeseen accident nobody could have stopped. The absolute truth? She was perfectly healthy. The disease was total fiction. But the suspect bought it hook, line, and sinker, snapping almost instantly. He practically exhaled, muttering how the fake story finally explained away the terrifying, fatal mistake. His fortress of lies crumbled. Seconds later, he completely abandoned the fantasy that they never crossed paths. The biological evidence was no longer up for debate. He bummed a smoke, inhaled deeply, and spilled everything. For the next few minutes, he unraveled a twisted alibi that had been rotting inside his head for 2 agonizing years. His new spin? Cruising down a pitch-black country lane after the party, he just happened to spot her wandering solo. Stranded without a cell or a cab, she needed a way back, so he supposedly played the Good Samaritan. According to his narrative, she hopped in, and every single intimate act that went down was completely agreed upon. Then, his story took a dark turn. Her lungs just quit out of nowhere, zero red flags. He swore panic took over, desperately attempting CPR to bring her back, but the life was already gone. I swear I never meant to cause her harm. Look, we need the truth now. Did you two hook up? Yeah, we got intimate and things took a wild, violent turn. She specifically asked me to restrict her airway. I squeezed her throat, and suddenly her body went completely dead weight. I freaked, slapping her cheeks, but she was entirely unresponsive. I backed off immediately. I am absolutely not into messing with someone who is unconscious. I was hyperventilating, desperately smacking her face over and over, violently shaking her to wake up. I was doing everything possible to get a reaction. Man, I have no freaking clue what went wrong. Dislocated bones? Massive trauma? I swear to God I have zero memory of causing that kind of brutal damage. If you do not give us a damn good reason, the jury is going to view you as a bloodthirsty monster. You get that, right? Look, my mind is blank. I cannot explain this. Stop lying. You recall the specifics. I remember details. You remember exactly how it went down. Okay, I only recall fragmented pieces of the nightmare. A genuine blackout or a masterclass in deception? I won't confess. I just recall fragments. What fragments? The investigator pressed. I have absolutely no clue. I recall violently striking her, desperately shaking her to pull her back from the edge. CPR was completely impossible. I only managed to pry at her jaw. I swear I possess zero clue how she suffered those catastrophic wounds. Maybe my car door slammed into her when I bailed out? You'd have to physically crush her to inflict that, the detective countered. Listen, I swear it wasn't a deliberate hit, he deflected. Let's pretend for a second it was an innocent mistake. Why then, rather than grabbing a phone, rather than dialing 911 right away, instead of reacting the way any normal person would, after witnessing a tragic, fatal mishap, Daniel Clay navigated roughly 10 miles toward a desolate timberland, bordering abandoned train tracks in Ash Township, dragging her lifeless frame deep into the brush, discarded her like absolute trash under a veil of dead branches, and vanished into the darkness. He drove back to his house. He went to sleep. He clocked into work. For months, he consumed the frantic media circus hunting for Chelsea Bruck. He listened to the agonizing daily pleas, guarding his sinister secret in total silence. Yet, a terrifying revelation surfaced right as cuffs were slapped on him, casting an even darker shadow over the entire investigation. A survivor broke her silence, revealing that roughly 1 month before the genetic breakthrough, Daniel Clay had brutally ambushed her inside a residential apartment. Her horrifying testimony exposed a degree of sheer savagery, utterly incompatible with a guy claiming an innocent, tragic mishap during an October 31st celebration. It outlined a chilling modus operandi, a clear predatory habit of utilizing extreme force against women that neither began nor concluded with Chelsea Bruck. Authorities finally locked him behind bars. The official indictments dropped like a heavy hammer. Following almost 2 years of agonizing hunts, tears, and haunting mysteries, her loved ones held a suspect, yet the war had just begun. He wasn't surrendering quietly. When the gavel finally struck a Michigan bench in May 2017, almost 3 years had evaporated since Chelsea walked into that cursed costume bash and vanished. 3 grueling years of dead ends, shattered hearts, relentless sleuthing, and agonizing delays. Now, at long last, every single shred of evidence hoarded, catalogued, analyzed, and verified would be dragged into the unforgiving spotlight for the jurors to dissect. The gallery packed tight with hungry reporters, devastated relatives, and obsessed locals who had tracked the nightmare since the initial dispatch. Citizens who plastered the town with posters and scoured the woods came out in droves. For them, this wasn't merely a judicial formality for the locale. This was the reckoning where the suppressed reality would finally echo out loud. The state's attorneys strutted in, armed with a lethal, razor-sharp narrative. Their theory was brutally simple. Daniel Clay lured Chelsea into his vehicle under the guise of safety because she was isolated, digitally disconnected, and an easy target. What masqueraded as a warm gesture on a freezing autumn evening was actually the prologue to a total bloodbath. The second she was trapped within those metal doors, cut off from rescue routes, the horrific nightmare violently ignited. The prosecution alleged a sickening violation followed by a merciless pummeling blows the coroner classified as devastating, relentless, and highly calculated. The catastrophic trauma, devastating her skull, facial bones, mandible, and orbital cavities, didn't stem from a solitary strike or fleeting second. They mirrored an uninterrupted, cold-blooded execution. Stepping into the box, the coroner dismantled his lies with chillingly precise, undeniable science. She testified with absolute clinical conviction that a crushed windpipe wasn't what immediately ended the victim's life through basic suffocation. Choking the life out of someone demands relentless, brutal force held steady for several agonizing minutes. A victim doesn't simply fade to black in 30 seconds. It is never a fluke. It requires a grueling, intimate, and deeply conscious commitment to murder. That clinical bombshell obliterated the suspect's core alibi before his lawyers even drew their weapons in court. In a shocking twist, Daniel Clay opted to gamble with the witness stand. Swearing under oath to spin a tale for the jury is a lethal, calculated risk in high-stakes homicide proceedings. It invites the state to draw blood. It strips the accused bare, leaving his narrative totally exposed to those deciding his fate. Here, it meant the killer had to stare into the hollow eyes of a devastated family and weave his twisted version of her final horrifying moments. Under the glaring courtroom lights, his sworn narrative practically parroted the fiction he originally fed the detectives. He swore he merely stumbled upon a lost girl, wandering an ink-black highway late at night, desperately seeking a route back. He insisted he just tossed out a lifeline. He claimed she willingly took the bait. A willing participant in her own brutal demise? That was his twisted defense. He spun a sickening narrative, painting the victim as the architect of her own nightmare. He claimed she practically begged for the rough physical encounter, insisting her sudden, lifeless collapse caught him completely and terribly off guard. Murder, he swore, was never part of the plan. He fiercely claimed the whole nightmare was a tragic fluke. Panic, he argued, drove his horrible choices afterward, but a fatal ending was absolutely never the intended goal. The state absolutely shredded that fairy tale, exposing the monster underneath. Take the poison ivy outfit. Its violently shredded remains told a terrifying, entirely different truth than his carefully rehearsed lie. You do not get catastrophic fabric tearing from eager, willing undressing. Heavy seams do not violently burst open when both parties are playing along. The bottom half was not slipped off. Sheer, savage brute strength had ripped it away. That ruined green fabric screamed just one undeniable reality absolute, overpowering violence. Then came the horrifying medical evidence. The autopsy report detailed absolute devastation, crushing skull fractures, pulverized orbital bones, a shattered jawline, and 2 teeth violently ripped out. Experts confirmed this level of catastrophic facial trauma does not come from bare knuckles. Annihilating bone structure on that scale requires horrifying, massive power. It signaled a heavy weapon, swung over and over with lethal purpose far beyond a simple mishap. This was no passion play gone wrong. It was a cold, calculated, and relentless slaughter. His post-murder playbook was even more chilling. When her pulse finally stopped, regardless of the trigger, the killer made incredibly calculated moves, no frantic 911 dial, no desperate flagging down of passing headlights. Skipping the emergency room, he aimlessly cruised the dark streets for 30 to 45 minutes. 10 miles later, he dragged her lifeless shell deep into isolated woods by the railroad tracks, hastily burying her beneath scattered branches before fleeing. You do not execute a flawless disposal mission while paralyzed by innocent panic. This was the ice-cold plotting of a predator burying his secrets in the dirt. Detectives soon unearthed a deeply unsettling, hidden link. His former flame, Jessica, actually slung plates right alongside the victim at a local restaurant. Clocking shifts together for years, the two women were intimately familiar with each other's lives. While the missing persons posters went up, Jessica obsessively tracked the grim news updates, nervously discussing the haunting case with traumatized coworkers, enduring the exact same agonizing uncertainty, gripping the entire town. Yet through those terrifying months of community panic, her former boyfriend remained dead silent, refusing to offer a single comment, a shred of worry, or even whisper the victim's name. He spectated the desperate manhunt like a casual observer enjoying a sick movie. Until the handcuffs clicked, then the facade shattered. 2 cryptic voicemails hit Jessica's phone, a pathetic apology for a grave sin, promising a very long disappearance. He offered zero concrete details, skipping any desperate pleas of innocence for fragmented ramblings that felt like a permanent farewell. The courtroom then witnessed the damning police tapes. Jurors stared as the suspect boldly lied to investigators, swearing he never touched her, confidently denying any DNA trace, until a cleverly planted fake medical bluff broke him completely. The psychological collapse was caught raw on camera, revealing the sinister truth hiding underneath. It took mere hours for the hammer to drop, guilty of felony homicide and corpse concealment. Dodging the specific premeditation charge was a slight legal technicality, hinging entirely on complex courtroom definitions of forethought and intent. Yet the reality remained brutally permanent. Michigan state law dictates an absolute, mandatory true life sentence. This monster was never seeing the outside of a steel cage again. A hollow apology mumbled exclusively to local broadcast crews trailed his initial, chilling arraignment hearing on secondary homicide charges. Standing before the bench, he shockingly waived his own bail, openly resigning himself to the concrete block. The gavel fell. 10 prior arrests painted a terrifying picture of Clay, who casually confessed from his cell that intimacy turned lethal for 22-year-old Bruck after a Halloween bash. Action News insiders revealed a chilling detail today. The predator hoarded morbid trophies from his victim. Is greater than soundtrack. Inside, Bruck's loved ones occupied the front benches, mere inches from the monster, while muffled rage echoed from the gallery. Eerie score. Forced to stare down the accused, they exited in shattered silence. The final judgment, July 13th, 2017. When that fateful morning dawned, the courthouse witnessed a profound spectacle permanently scarring the memories of every onlooker present. Leandra Bruck, the grieving matriarch, stood to confront the absolute sociopath who brutally stole away her youngest girl. Dead silence blanketed the chamber as attendees instinctively braced for impact. Spectators anticipated vicious, unbridled wrath, the agonizing explosion of a shattered soul, finally unleashing years of dark torment onto its architect. Yet her actual statement sent a paralytic shockwave through everyone. Draped in vivid purple, Chelsea's favorite hue, she looked her daughter's butcher in the eye, offering absolute forgiveness. Wearing a memorial pin of her child's radiant smile, she physically extended a holy scripture right toward the killer. Projecting an eerie, unshakable emotional composure, she clarified pardoning him wasn't amnesia. The bleeding hadn't stopped. His monstrous acts remained abhorrent, and legal vengeance was utterly necessary yet to secure her sanity. To literally keep breathing, she surrendered the venom, recognizing that hoarding such toxic hatred would inevitably devour her own soul alive from the inside out. The defendant remained a stone wall. Not a single muscle twitched across his deadpan, remorseless visage. Zero humanity seeped through his hardened exterior to prove her profound mercy had even registered. That terrifying, psychopathic void proved far more chilling than any violent outburst. Leandra then shifted outwardly. Her desperate plea targeted everyone listening. She warned this blood-soaked tragedy served as a grim reminder. Never abandon a buddy in shadowy spaces, and never blindly trust that a night out ends safely. She confessed, her household still agonizingly waits to hear her little girl walk through their entryway. That crushing revelation suffocated the room before Judge Daniel White pivoted his lethal glare directly at Clay. The magistrate dissected the horrific crimes with clinical precision, laying bare the sheer, undeniable depravity of the defendant's actions. He dropped the inescapable hammer. Permanent confinement without parole. Zero loopholes, zero clemency, and absolutely no alternate timeline where this predator ever tastes freedom. But the judicial hammer kept swinging. The assailant caught a separate punishment for sexually attacking another female, a dark precursor happening mere weeks before forensics linked him to this slaughter. That atrocity bagged him a devastating 40 to 75 years behind bars, as the bench meticulously detailed the undisputed horror. He deemed it savage, a degrading violation designed to permanently shatter a human spirit, before locking eyes with the convict to deliver a notoriously blunt final assessment. He verbally decimated the killer, branding him a parasitic wolf, a deceptive creep, and an unapologetic serial stalker against women. This wasn't theatrical courtroom grandstanding. It was ironclad damnation, forged by an official, sworn to sift through gruesome evidence and deliver ultimate judicial retribution. In 2019, the desperate convict launched a legal Hail Mary to slash his sentence. The appellate judges tore into the transcripts, scrutinized the dark details, and ruthlessly slammed the door shut on him. The crushing mandate remained completely bulletproof. He is currently rotting inside the Macomb Correctional Facility in Michigan. He'll expire caged. Meanwhile, the victim's legacy lives on through a culinary grant forged at Monroe College, the exact campus where she intended to enroll, the specific kitchen courses she dreamed of mastering, representing the stolen destiny she was tirelessly constructing before her execution. Students whisper her moniker there today, not as a thriving freshman, but as a haunting monument to a hijacked ambition, a driving force absolutely refusing to fade into the shadows. Chelsea Ellen Bruck was merely 22. The baby of 5 siblings, she dedicated 4 solid years grinding. She adored cooking, blasting tracks, gaming, and pure joy armed with a fierce blueprint for a life violently denied. A girl vanishes into a dark Halloween rave. She should have made it back. She earned whatever bright future lay beyond those woods. Instead, a predator played God, earning himself a permanent cage while hiding dark secrets. Ultimately, a petty robbery and routine swabbing shattered his alibi. One stolen rucksack. That singular thread unspooled a nightmare. Just a logged police report and forensic evidence he totally failed to justify, despite spinning desperate lies. 2.5 years after Chelsea Bruck vanished into that October bash, medical examiners finally took the mic, detailing the grim reality unearthed alongside her bones. Is greater than. The garment surfaced bizarrely preserved, save for 2 horrifying anomalies: massive tears targeting the pelvic region and a shredded shoulder harness. Experts swore these lacerations weren't from normal removal. Someone violently gouged the material, using jagged metal objects just to tight it away. Daniel Clay left his microscopic signature all over her masquerade attire and faux hair. The grim discovery happened purely by chance, as John Marin moved soil across his private acreage in Ash Township. He stumbled upon her scattered bones. Is greater than I kept staring at that mound of earth, trying to figure out if I could somehow maneuver my heavy machinery into that narrow gap. Then I glanced sideways. That is exactly when the corpse caught my eye. Is greater than his attorneys spun a twisted narrative, claiming Brooks suffered a lethal accident amidst mutual intimacy. On the stand, lawyers aggressively interrogated her closest confidant regarding the dead girl's private life. Is greater than. Was she into extreme physical encounters, something brutal or forceful? Is greater than, absolutely not. Is greater than. The woman raising Clay's baby actually attended that exact same rave, unexpectedly testifying against him for the state. Is greater than. She handcrafted this incredible Ivy getup entirely from scratch, honestly. Paired it perfectly with vibrant violet hair and a plastic jug. Is greater than. She testified he kept his mouth completely shut about Brooke until the cuffs clicked. Is greater than claimed he felt profound remorse. Begged me to tell our boy Bryson he loves him deeply. Kept apologizing endlessly. He admitted he was facing decades behind bars. Is greater than. Retribution here arrived at a grueling, agonizing crawl. It forced her relatives through endless psychological torture no verdict could ever cure. Yet, it landed, sealing Chelsea Bruck's tragic fate. Just another crisp autumn evening. Embers fading into ash. Silence. Drunken partygoers stumbling out into the pitch-black fields to catch a ride. For most of those 600 revelers swarming that Frenchtown Township lot. In Michigan, on October 25, 2014, the chaos faded into harmless lore. Some hazy, wild weekend bender they bragged about to their buddies days later. But for a single Monroe County household, the timeline shattered. permanently severing their existence into before and after. Chelsea Bruck didn't enter that massive blowout as the star of some gruesome murder mystery. She was an actual 22-year-old from rural Michigan who clocked into her regular shift like clockwork. A devoted sibling dreaming of a culinary career, racing toward a destiny she eagerly anticipated, carrying an infectious energy her community still mourns today. She was not foolish. She wasn't acting carelessly. She was simply a girl at a massive festival separated from her crew, left with a dead battery, desperately seeking a lift back. That is the whole truth. Those trivial circumstances sealed her doom, a terrifyingly mundane misstep threatening every single one of us. Until a monster spotted her exposed flank and executed his grim plan. That chilling reality haunts your thoughts when the case files close. Beyond the autopsy reports, the legal theater, or the final prison term, you cannot shake the terrifyingly ordinary spark that ignited this tragedy. A stranded girl hovering near a dark road, begging passing headlights for a safe harbor. This exact scenario plays out nationwide on any given Friday. Typically, it ends without incident. Usually, a good Samaritan steps up, wrapping the night with a quick message to calm a nervous mother. Except when the shadows bite back. This investigation stretches far beyond a solitary killer's sick urges. It serves as a brutal warning. Stripped of any self-righteous lecturing, delivering a cold, undeniable reality check, the universe violently shoves down your throat without asking permission. Her grieving mother testified wearing the victim's signature hue, clutching scripture while facing down the psychopath who destroyed their bloodline. Her words echoed past the defendant's cage, broadcasting a chilling plea to the masses. Never abandon your crew. You arrive as a pack, you leave as a pack. Never gamble on their safety. Never promise to loop back later, only to let chaos pull your focus. She wasn't pointing fingers. How do you bury a daughter and build a shield from the grief? That shattered family took unimaginable darkness and forged it into armor for the living. It is a terrifying resilience most of us will thankfully never have to test. Yet Leandra Brooks stood unbreaking before a suffocating gallery, staring down her darkest hour. Today, that memorial fund at Monroe County Community College remains a living, breathing defiance. She haunts those culinary kitchens exactly as she intended, not as a grim cautionary tale, but as a guiding force. Just a driven girl, obsessed with flavors, desperately carving out her own fierce independence. The stubbornly optimistic dreamer her inner circle knew, that girl was not erased on October 26, 2014. Her spirit was fiercely resurrected by her loyal tribe, planted where it could eternally thrive. Did you orchestrate her end? Not at all, I swear. Did you slaughter Chelsea Bruck? Absolutely not. Then justify that denial. Why play innocent? Because her taking her final breath wasn't part of my plan. It wasn't supposed to happen. That was Daniel Clay, desperately trying to sell a courtroom the twisted narrative that this bloodbath was just a tragic accident. The prosecutor went straight for the jugular, tearing into the accused's sickening claim of consensual intimacy. You have repeatedly sworn on record that the struggle lasted 20 to 30 seconds, correct? Exactly. Or are you conveniently manipulating your story, sir, to match the forensic expert's timeline of a strangulation? It only took a handful of hours behind closed doors for a damning verdict. Convicted of felony homicide for erasing Chelsea, the state got exactly the kill shot they aimed for. Clay goes down. It still carries the absolute crushing weight of a first-degree homicide. The peers concluded he didn't plot it out, but they nailed him for felony murder, cementing the horrific reality. She was slaughtered right in the middle of another brutal crime. Whether it was abduction or vicious assault, the jury threw his twisted fantasy of consent straight in the trash. They had multiple avenues to explore. They weighed multiple homicide degrees alongside the sickening charge of burying the evidence. If they bought his pathetic sob story, they could have settled for manslaughter. They absolutely refused. When the judge announced the initial acquittal on premeditation, the air vanished from the room. Nobody knew what trapdoor would open next. Pay attention. The panel concludes the following regarding Charge 1, premeditated homicide, acquitted. Felony homicide, convicted. The prosecution team felt complete vindication today. The evidence painted an inescapable trap. It is glaringly obvious, Mr. Clay. You are a deceiving, predatory butcher. He was thrown into a concrete box forever, completely stripped of any parole chance for destroying. Chelsea. The monster is rotting inside Macomb Correctional right now, where he will draw his final pathetic breath. Zero chance to beg a parole board. No fantasy countdown to freedom. No alternate universe where he sees sunlight again. His 2019 appeal was utterly crushed, locking his fate. Every single loophole he chased slammed shut. That July 2017 gavel strike in Michigan became his permanent tombstone. A maddening 24 months bled by between her vanishing into thin air and slapping cuffs on her executioner. It all unraveled over a pathetic, petty robbery and a standard cheek swab the predator completely underestimated. The ultimate trap was a simple computer ping, a genetic match triggered from a booking over a stolen backpack. Ultimately, this monster wasn't taken down by brilliant, cinematic detective work or a sudden confession from the shadows. He was swallowed whole by the cold, methodical, inescapable gears of the system doing its unforgiving job. Grinding data, verifying hits, sealing fates. This genre isn't just cheap thrills for the morbidly curious. At its core, it is a sacred archive, a fierce declaration that this soul walked the earth, faced true evil, and their nightmare demands attention. Chelsea Ellen Bruck was real. She was brilliantly hilarious, fiercely loved her bloodline, obsessed over culinary arts, and was charging toward greatness. The horrific reality of her final moments demands absolute focus. Knowing her butcher will decay in a frozen Michigan cell is the only shred of redemption a nightmare like this will ever yield. Sleep well, Chelsea. If this descent into darkness gripped you, spread the word. Keep her memory loud. The greatest power of these investigations isn't just exposing grim details, but refusing to let the victim fade into a forgotten police file. She wasn't just a headline. She was a force of nature, and her legacy demands profound respect. We appreciate you braving the shadows with us until the bitter end. If you crave more deep dives into true madness, actual victims, buried secrets, and fatal outcomes, hit subscribe. You will not want to miss what we uncover next. Unearthing the truth and connecting these twisted dots takes relentless dedication. Your backing gives us the power to keep exposing these dark realities. Keep looking over your shoulder until our next investigation. The haunting tragedy of Chelsea Bruck serves as a chilling testament to the fact that evil often thrives in the most vibrant celebrations. On a cold Michigan Halloween, among hundreds of masked strangers and thumping bass, a brilliant and hilarious young woman vanished into a literal nightmare. Her story is a visceral lesson on the peril of misplaced trust and the terrifying speed at which a festive night can transform into a struggle for survival. The most profound educational takeaway is that behind every mask lies an unpredictable reality. Daniel Clay, a predator who left his biological signature violently stamped across Chelsea's shredded garments, proved that a shadow can lurk even in the brightest crowds. This tragedy teaches us that vigilance is not a choice, but a necessity. We must look out for one another, especially when the faces around us are hidden, because the grim reality of a predator is often closer than we imagine. Ultimately, Chelsea's legacy is a call to refuse to let the victims fade. While her butcher now decays in a frozen cell, we honor Chelsea by keeping her memory loud and vibrant. She was a force of nature, a daughter, and a friend whose life was hijacked in its infancy. Let her story burn into our collective conscience. Stay alert, cherish your circle, and never let the darkness of one individual extinguish the light of a soul who is charging toward greatness.